All right, here it is. You're all recorded, so not that it'll make any difference. Not that anyone would care about anything you said. It is, after all, YouTube. Um, I had the weirdest, I had the weirdest dream the other night. I don't think I said this. I understand if you have a dream where you don't have a brake, you don't have a brake pedal. If you don't have a brake pedal in your car, that would make sense to me. You're having a dream, you don't have a brake pedal, you can't stop your car. But I had a dream where I didn't have a accelerator pedal. So the car just rolled to a stop. And that was the dream. And I'm trying to figure out what it means or what it says about me. I have no idea. But if you have any ideas, let me know.
Maybe we shouldn't let you.
Maybe or not. They never make any sense. It's all nonsense. Okay, you're looking at a vertigo inducing diagram. It seemed like a good idea when I made it. Let me make it bigger. Since we have people that haven't needed to set the context here. This is kind of a concentric layout of the genealogies, if you will, of not even that. It's a telescopic representation of the subject matter of where Genesis heads. And so you move through these people, the story unfolds through the introduction of these people, these important people. So you move from Adam to his son Seth, to his son down the chain to Noah, then to his son Shem, and then on down the chain, following, and you'll see these forks in the road. And the narrative, if you imagine driving down the road, you reach Cain and Abel, and then Seth, and now it's going to fork at Seth, and you're going to leave the other two behind, and then you're going to move on forward down Seth's line till you reach Noah, and then you're going to move that way and leave the rest of them behind. And then on the other side of the flood, eventually you're going to get to, you're going to get to Shem, his son. So you leave the other two behind with that mention of Canaan, Ham's son, which you're now supposed to hold in memory till you get to the conquest when Canaan becomes an issue again. But now you fork at Shem and you go down that road, you take that exit, and you head towards Terah. And then you hit that run and you leave all of those other people that are mentioned in the genealogies behind until you get to Abraham. So there's Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. You leave Haran and Nahor aside for the moment, and you head down the exit of Abraham. And then now you have Ishmael. Now you're going to have Isaac and Ishmael. And you're going to hit Isaac and you're going to leave Ishmael behind and fork at Isaac until you get to Jacob and Esau. And then now with Jacob, you're going to fork and you leave behind Esau and head down to Jacob. Take the Jacob exit. And then you finally arrive at the 12 tribes. But even then, in the story, you're going to get to Joseph. And for a long time, till the very end, you're going to leave behind the other 11. And you're going to take the Joseph exit in Egypt until you finally arrive. And then they all join Joseph again in Egypt. And that's how the story goes. The story propels itself through the introduction, through these genealogy, to the termination points of these genealogies. That's how it works. And then so what you find is that what begins with the creation of the heavens and the earth in chapter 1 will end with the midpoint is the covenant promise of land, the land of Canaan, in which Abraham is when he receives the covenant promise. But they will be taken out of Canaan and they will be taken to Egypt, and that's how the story is going to end. And then the story will begin then exactly where the story of Exodus will begin, exactly where the story of Genesis ended, only with a 400 and some odd year gap in time, about which we know nothing. And then we move on again, but now it's going to be the nation of Israel. And so this is how Genesis works. Some people find it frustrating because we have trouble with genealogies and why they matter. They certainly did not. But that's how they wrote their stories. Jacob becomes Israel, and then Israel goes to Egypt, the whole nation, if you will. Not a
to
nation.
throw things off too much, it's probably just a trivial thing, it just hit me as you're talking about that 430-year gap. That's about the same gap that there was between Malachi and
Yeah.
Matthew.
Yep.
Never thought about that before, but
It's also about the same, little longer than the same period of time of between the conquest and the first king.
Yep.
Saul. Actually, it's very, very close, almost exactly the same time. That would have been, let's call it, by my reckoning, 1410 BC to 1050, 1040
good stuff like that.
for Saul. So you're talking, yeah, a little less than 400 years. Okay. So this is this is sort of a subject matter approach to Genesis chapter 12 through chapter 22. We move from promise in chapter 12 to this excursus, if you will, with Lot, which, you know, we can debate why he's there, and then further excursus into Sodom, which corrects itself with the destruction of Sodom, and then Lot disappears. There it is again. You get this over and over again in Genesis, where a person or a thing arrives on the scene. Actually, it's a person every time. Actually, it's not. Represents a threat to the covenant or a threat to the promise of land, or even inheritance. And then the story then resolves what will we do about this threat to the covenant promise? In the case of the land, it's going to be Lot first up. Actually, it's going to be Abraham getting to Canaan and then promptly exiting through down south into Egypt, where I believe he firmly had no intention of going back to Canaan, but he got chased back to Canaan by the Pharaoh because of an act of God. That's a threat to the covenant resolved. Then Lot arrives on the scene, and Abraham says to Lot, look, there's a lot of we both got a lot of stuff. We can't really live with each other. Our people keep fighting. So, you know, you pick which way. You go to the left, I'll go to the right. Meaning if you go to the west, I'll go to the east. You go to the east, I'll go to the west. Well, to the west is the land of Canaan, where they're standing. To the east is other side of the Jordan. So everybody holds their breath, because if Lot picks Canaan, then what does that mean for the promise to Abraham? So everybody holds their breath, and of course, the conflict, the potential problem is resolved by Lot removing himself from the situation to the other side of the Jordan, which will become a loose end when he gets to Sodom that God will clean up. And we just got through with that in chapter 19. He'll finally clean up the loose end. He ties up a lot of loose ends. He ties up all the loose ends. God does. He leaves no stone on nothing escapes his tender loving care, if you will. But that's how the conflict with Lot is resolved. Then along comes Ishmael, who becomes a threat to the covenant promise of Sarah bearing a son, because Abraham wants Ishmael to be the heir. So my, oh my, how will we resolve this? Well, God is going to resolve this one personally. He will personally come down and say, no. Not Ishmael. Sarah's going to have a son. And Abraham says, okay, if you say so. And then eventually, as we will see in the next story, it's another chapter away, the Ishmael problem will be finally and fully resolved as well. And those kinds of things aren't over yet, because you will see Jacob and Esau. Jacob is the younger son. The older son is the one who inherits, just like Ishmael was the older son. This is a repeated theme in the Bible. David was the youngest son. It happens over and over again. Jesus was the oldest son, but the pattern is often that God chooses the younger. And there's 3 examples of it right there. And so what we see then in yellow there, you see the covenant for land, which is chapter 15. The covenant with Abraham just was land. It exists within the larger container of the promise, which is more than land, which is what Paul picks up on in the New Testament when he starts talking about the promise to all the nations fulfilled, through faith in Jesus, where through faith the Gentiles become children of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. He's talking about the sort of the antecedent of the covenant, that which, from which the covenant was derived, which was the promise in chapter 12. Making chapter 12 the beginning of the history of redemption for the Gentile people of God in a very real sense. But at any rate, so this story begins in the sort of bracketing happens at chapter 15 with the promise of the covenant, or with the covenant of the land. Then you see Hagar and Ishmael, Hagar being Ishmael's mother. The covenant of circumcision in chapter 17. Then you see the destruction of Sodom in chapter 19. Abraham and Abimelech, which we're going to do today, which we have to talk about why is this story even here, which we often do. Then the birth of Isaac finally in chapter 21, and you think, oh, all is resolved. Finally, we can get on our way with the history of redemption. Everybody lives happily ever after for about 4 verses. So God re-arrives on the scene in chapter 22 to order the sacrifice, the sacrifice of Isaac on an altar by his father. And then that gets resolved when God arrives personally and reaffirms the covenant promise once again. And you might think, oh, good, finally. The clear sailing from chapter 20, end of chapter 22, right on all the way through to chapter 50 of Genesis. Yeah. Genesis is chaos. Genesis is chaos from Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, and the earth was formless and void, darkness was over the surface of the deep, chaos. It's chaos all the way through, all the way to the very end. It's amazing. But anyway, what begins with that covenant, that statement by God, the statement by the narrator, as he reads the mind of God and records it for us, Abraham and reads the mind of Abraham. Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him by God as righteousness. He reads the mind of both participants, Abraham and God, and the divinely inspired author now encapsulates their minds, what they're thinking in that statement. And you get that a lot in Genesis, where the divinely inspired author gets to peek into the thinking of God himself and records it for posterity. And then the bracket ends with the sacrifice of Isaac. Well, opened with Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, a fundamentally important statement and idea for Paul in Romans, is going to somehow come to fulfillment with the sacrifice of Isaac when God is going to say, now I know, since you have not withheld your only son, and so on. And therefore, and then he reiterates the covenant promise. So there's a bracketing going on between chapter 12 and chapter 22, in my opinion. And then he's pretty much done with Abraham after he sends his servant out, his slave out to get Isaac a wife. So that's, I don't know, an ad hoc, impromptu, by the seat of my pants summation of some things that we've been talking about. Does anybody want to comment on any of that?
Actually, guys, in Genesis to Revelations, when John Revelation talked about Jesus in chapter 12.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I think so. And all the way through, it's almost a beginning and end. You have in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then where is it? And God, and I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Is that the last chapter or the chapter before? 21. It's 22 chapters in Revelation. Yeah, so it's understated, but yeah, Revelation again ties up a lot of loose ends.
And you can see the Genesis and Revelation.
Yep.
If you kind of do it together.
Even the creation theme, which we've talked about, which is very prominent in his position as creator, which stands behind him as king, which is my position. He's the creator king. Jesus is the creator redeemer in that order. You see that very strongly. The angels are worshiping the creator. They don't forget for a single microsecond their place before the creator of all things. Okay,
So maybe the chaos is a illustration of the sin. And then God, it kind of illustrates how holy God is, how he's sovereign through all of it.
I think it's to just restate a little bit, chaos is a word which represents the effects of sin. The scarring of sin produced a chaotic world. And what we find out in the biblical narrative, this is one of the reasons narrative is so important. God is unaffected in every way by the chaos and the scarring that sin has produced on this fallen world. He is unaffected. In fact, that's where he does his best work. Chaos is his specialty. He works through chaos and he produces. He is a master of making the omelet out of scrambled eggs.
You know, this brings us right back to his holiness.
His power, his omniscience, everything he is manifested in holiness, is manifested, his righteousness, his wisdom, his foresight. That's a bad word. I take that word back. Forget I said that word. God doesn't have foresight. He doesn't need it. Humans have foresight, which is imperfect.
Forward nation.
He has the videotape. He has the videotape of all that is or ever will be.
But he doesn't have to wait 3 or 4 hours to movie figure out
No.
what happened.
Yeah.
Now, the videotape includes what he is going to do. We can have that philosophical discussion this summer if we do that kind of thing.
And as Pastor Phil has been encouraging us to memorize God's word helps us constantly see his holiness and all of God's attributes.
Yeah, and I think that it highlights also the importance of reading it at the grand level, even if you don't understand it, just keep reading it and reading it and reading it and listening to it, and don't stop, and it begins to become clearer and clearer and clearer. All right, do something new. We just finished chapter 19, which is the destruction of Sodom and the salvation of Lot for the sake of Abraham, who became very, very important in chapter 15 with the covenant. And we just finished the nasty story of his 2 daughters repaying him for, I guess it's what counts as an act of honor, when he wanted to deliver his 2 daughters to the horde outside the door. I don't know what to make of that, but this is how they, I don't know what you want to call it, get even, repay him. Yeah, this story about what they do with him to bear children. And then we talked about the story in Judges 19 with the near extermination of Benjamin because of the Levite and his concubine in Gibeon, who was given to the hordes in precisely the same manner as we see Lot try to do here, but the angels save the situation. Nobody saves that concubine in Judges 19. I think of that as one of the saddest stories in the Bible. Yeah, and in a book in a narrative filled beginning to end, filled with tragedy. That one will hit you between the eyes. Like the story of Hagar, which is coming up again in the next chapter. That also is a very sad story. Very sad character in the book of Genesis, Hagar, the Egyptian, whom Abraham probably picked up and was given to Abraham by the Pharaoh. That would be my guess.
Right.
Okay, so now he's going to journey again. The Negev with a V means the South Country. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. We'll look at this in a minute. he sojourned in Gerar, let's look at it now, which is, over in the land of, what they call the land of the Philistines. But he's gonna move now. He's gonna move, this is Mamre. This is where he was when Sodom was destroyed,
Mhm.
very close to where Hebron. What is Hebron in his history of Israel?
Hebron was part of the allotment to Caleb.
David was first made king.
David was first made king.
They're all true, but she read my mind. So
She
gets extra
She gets a
credit.
gold star.
Gets extra credit. Yeah, Hebron is a key city in the history of Israel because it would have been before Jerusalem, it was the leading city of Judah. Judah being that big section of the most southern tribe, the most southern allotment. And that's the place where David, the elders of Hebron, anointed David as king over Judah. And then it was going to take him over 7 more years before he would become king over all of Israel. Courtesy of, well, not courtesy of, but could have been by Abner, who was commander of Saul's army, but after some chaos, after some intrigue by, duplicitous intrigue by Joab, who was the commander of David's army. I love those stories. They're unbelievable. They're just such a mess.
Yeah.
But somehow the plan of God just keeps propelling into it on. It's unbelievable. But anyway, Hebron then was a key city, and Mamre is right next to where it was founded. It may be related. I have no idea. At any rate, he's going to move now. I thought all of this down here was the South Country, Negev. So he's journeying south, but it's more like southwest towards where the Philistines are. I think it might be important that he establishes himself over here, because this is where the story of with Abimelech is going to take place. Because what you'll see then is Abraham plant a flag in Philistine territory. What'll happen is the Philistines will be there like a thorn in the flesh. They'll be there, a thorn in the flesh for Israel until sometime in the reign of David. All the way through the period of the judges and then into the kings. Saul won't be able to solve the problem. And you're going to find during the reign of Saul that the Philistines, even at the end of his reign, they will have garrisons up here in the middle of Israel. So they basically have their way with Israel. And then eventually David's going to come in and finally dispose of them as the nemesis of what began with Samson when he brought down the house on the 3,000 will finally end with David when he finally overthrows the Philistine yoke. But you see an anticipation of that with Abraham's immigration to Philistine territory where he's going to plant a flag. And I think that's the significance of it. That's my own opinion.
You purchased a piece of property, that's the only piece of property as far as I know, that you ever purchased in the land of Canaan,
Yeah, 1,000 years.
in Philistine territory. And if you look at it also, I can't help but to think about modern day.
Oh, boy.
See how close it is to Gaza.
Yeah, Gaza's right here. The Gaza Strip is down here. I don't know where exactly the border is, but it's, it's like this little, what's that?
Okay, how close it is to Jerusalem?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you get a high enough mountain, you can see all the way across here. This is not more than 30 or 40 miles.
No, I mean, the whole country itself is not that big.
Yeah.
About the size of Rhode Island, if I remember
They haven't changed a whole lot from now to then.
Yeah. And
And the year you had up there, it was 10 BC.
yeah,
And, hasn't changed well since then.
including the animosities and the conflicts. These people don't forget. And it's not over and it won't be over. I was at a wedding and a friend of mine, and this one guy was there very, very in this company, a very, very high up. He was one of the chief information officer, I think, at the time. He was Indian, is Indian. And, a great guy. And then next to him, sitting next to him was, Muslim. And he was a great guy. And so I was sitting at this table with these two and I couldn't help but notice them. One guy works for the other guy. The Muslim was working for the Indian guy who's Hindu by, at least nominally Hindu. And, I'm sitting there watching them and I'm thinking, man, the Muslim is Pakistani.
Oh, boy, in Pakistan, it's part of video one time.
He's working for this guy who's Indian. And, that's just this remarkable. They're sitting at this wedding ceremony next to each other, not even on opposite sides of the table. They're right next to each other. And their wives are there too. And they're sitting next to each other, I think. But I remember somehow it came around to it. We talked about a lot of different stuff. It was a great conversation. International politics, all kinds of stuff. And the subject of India and Pakistan came up, who are historic enemies. And I said, yeah, I remember saying something just about, yeah, they have not resolved those differences or whatever. And the Pakistanis immediately said, and they never will. That was his commentary on my statement, and nobody disagreed with him. They never forget. There are no peace treaties that you can sign. There are no concessions you can give to solve these kinds of problems. They both claim the same space. It's like two people claiming the same dollar. You can't cut it in half. Both sides want the dollar. Both sides believe the dollar is theirs. One side or the other gets the dollar. The side that gets it walks away happy. The side that doesn't get it doesn't forget, and he's coming back for that dollar. That's how it works. So anybody who dreams that they can negotiate some peace treaty, of course, the Egyptians negotiated a peace treaty with Israel, but Israel didn't care about Sinai. So yeah, we'll give you back Sinai. That's no problem. We don't want it. It's just a big desert. We don't want it anyway. So that's fine. But, that's just how it works. And it has its roots in right here. They've been fighting, all of these lands were conquered more than once. All the people who conquered claimed the land all the way up to the present day. So, when you have 10 people who claim the same dollar, that's a lot of people that are going to be unhappy. 9 people are going to be unhappy, or 10 people are going to be unhappy.
God told Hagar that he's gonna make Ishmael a great nation and there'll be enmity between Ishmael and Isaac for all eternity, so.
That's one of the most undeniable and astute prophecies ever in the Bible. That statement.
And when you add in the descendants of Lot, who had enmity towards Israel as well, and that region was just filled with either the descendants of Esau, the descendants of Ishmael, or the descendants of Lot.
Yeah. It is not a melting pot.
No,
And neither are we. Neither are we, by the way. But at any rate, go ahead.
It's been bitter for not just generations, it's been bitter for almost eternity.
For all the generations.
Yeah.
I remember saying a week or two ago that it's interesting that Ishmael just went away because he was the heir and Abraham had a lot of stuff. And he could say, look, I'm the eldest son, like Esau did. I'm the eldest son. This is my land by right. But you don't see that in the narrative. You see Ishmael heading off to the east again, we'll get to, where, it's always bad things happen to the east, as I've said over and over again. Bad to the east, good to the west. But he just disappears. And he's going to come back and with Isaac bury his father. So there's no animosity between those two. And there was no animosity between Abraham and the Amorites. They're allies. Abraham and what are called Philistines here, but it's pre-Philistines. There's no animosity there either. They're going to make a covenant in this chapter. All those animosities are going to percolate and simmer and build. Okay, from there, Abraham journeyed toward the territory of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. He sojourned in Gerar. These are all archaeological sites now that are being dug. Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, she is my sister. We heard this before. And Abimelech, king of Gerar, I don't know, sent and took Sarah, but God came to Abimelech. Abimelech simply means king, the king, like Pharaoh, in a dream by night and said, behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a man's wife. And so you see once again the direct fulfillment of the promise in chapter 12, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And so you saw that when Lot was taken captive in either 13 or 14, and Abraham went and destroyed the kings. And you saw that again when Lot was saved out of Sodom and Sodom was destroyed. In a sense, they were cursing Abraham because Lot was Abraham's nephew. You saw it with the Pharaoh who took Sarah. So he cursed Pharaoh. He cursed the one who cursed, so to speak, Abraham. And now you see it once again. And he's after this king as well. Don't mess with the children of promise. I don't know what I think about that as far as today goes. I know it's a hot issue in the church. What do we make? What of Israel is a hot issue in the modern church, modern evangelical church? What of Israel? It's not at all clear in my mind. It's not at all clear, but it's a very hot issue. But even today, you know, after 2,000 years, that land was given back to the Jews. It's all interesting. It's like, you know, just kind of like, just when you think you figure out what's going on with God, you go, oh, okay, I didn't, so you're thinking back in, you know, whatever, 100 years ago, yeah, God has abandoned Israel. Now you go, well, not so fast, you know. Or you think Israel is God's chosen, God's people, and he's blessing them. And then the exile happens in 586, 587 BC, and you go, well, maybe not. And then there's the reconstitution of Israel, of Jerusalem and the temple later in the century under the Persians. You go, okay, well, he's blessing them. Then, you know, he destroys Jerusalem again in 70 AD, and you go, well, maybe, okay, he's abandoned them again. And then a couple thousand years later, you're in our time, and you go, well.
Yeah. But that 2,000 year spread, that was the longest of them all.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt.
They're a very secular nation now.
Yeah.
There's wise because they didn't do all those things. You know, Israel was not being loyal to God in some.
Yeah.
And there's wise behind it.
Yes. Yeah. Israel is Israel. Beware of wanting to be the object of God's affection. And Israel is a case in point. When you're the object of God's affection. Now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, Lord, Lord, that would be Adonai. He's talking to God. Will you kill an innocent people? Where have we heard this before?
Abraham, previous chapter, maybe 2 chapters.
Exactly.
Chapter 18.
When Abraham has exactly this discussion, quibbles with God, one of 2 people in the Bible that got away with it. Moses was the other one. Will you destroy the righteous with the wicked? God said, no, I'm not going to destroy the righteous. What if you find 50 righteous, 40, 30, 20, 10, or whatever the numbers are? Would you destroy them? No, I'm not going to. If I find 1, or if I find 10, I'm not going to destroy the righteous. I'm not going to destroy the city. He finds 1. He says he saves 7 other. He saves 1, 2, 3 others for the sake of a concession to Lot. But there's the principle, and you see it there in 19, and now a chapter later, you have Abraham say it in chapter 19. Will you destroy the innocent, the righteous with the wicked? And now you have this foreign king in Philistine territory what will be Philistine territory, say, will you kill an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. And so you see these, it's not a flattering picture. This late in the story. I mean, we are now 8 chapters after 12 when he played the same game on Pharaoh. It's unflattering.
And think about Sarah's age. She was like 88, 89 years old.
Here,
Yeah,
yeah, she's 10 years younger than Abraham, so she'd be 90. She's going to have Isaac within a year.
yeah, of course she'd be 89, she had 95 before.
I don't know how that worked with the harem. I don't know what the rules were. What they, how that works with how you gather the women in your harem. Some of it, I think, was simply treaties.
Yeah,
So probably Abraham and Abimelech, they're going to make one here in a minute. Maybe what's happening really is, well, we were going to make a treaty, and let's still make a treaty, because they're going to do it here. At the end of the chapter, they're going to make a treaty. Maybe that was the intent at the whole time, and he said, well, this is what I want. And he said, okay. I mean, I don't know. It's not a flattering picture of Abraham. Right on the eve of when Isaac is about to be born. There's really no way to sugarcoat this. There's no way to put lipstick on this pig, in my opinion. If I can speak in a derogatory manner about the great patriarch, my hunch is you probably wouldn't disagree with me. Yeah, I did that. But anyway, it's the foreign king who's going to look honorable and righteous before the great patriarch Abraham, who believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. 5 chapters ago, Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now you have a foreign king looks at him and says, in the integrity of my heart and in the innocence of my hands, I've done this. And Abraham's just sitting over there with basically nothing to say about it. So they both lied. You can say, oh, half sister, sure. A half lie is probably worse than a whole lie. Because a half lie is extra duplicitous. It's a way that the liar tries to he's layering on duplicity to get away with a lie by calling it a half lie, a half truth, a half truth. He's finding a half truth. There was this moment 10 years ago when the director of national intelligence, James Clapper, who was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency when I worked there, he was a 3-star general at the time, worked 20 hours a day, but he became the director of national intelligence. And so he's testifying before Congress about all this surveillance that the National Security Agency is doing, tapping phones and stuff like that. And, one of the congressmen asked him, this is so great, asked him, are you doing this? And he obfuscated with an answer that was clearly meant to do that and get out of saying, yes, we're doing this. And so it came out within a short time, maybe from a whistleblower or something like that, that he was flat out lying. The answer is yes. So he was called, but he was back again, and they challenged him about his answer when the correct answer was yes. And he said, well, I was trying to say, how did he say it? I was trying to say the least untruthful thing I could. And a friend of mine's comment on that, who worked for the Central Intelligence Agency when I was at the Defense Intelligence Agency, we were talking about this, and he said, no, the least untruthful answer is yes. You said no. So if you're going to say the least untruthful answer, the answer is yes. That's the least untruthful answer you can give. So you're not even right here. You're still being dishonest. You don't even know how to say the least untruthful thing. It's a binary question, yes or no. There's no other answer to the question. But at any rate, why did I say all that? Here we are with why did I say all that?
after,
Oh, the half-truth thing. He was trying to give a half-truth. He was trying to find a way to wiggle in a little bit of truth. And then it all came out and says, no, you made it even worse. You doubled down on the badness of it when you said you were trying to say the least untruthful. You should have just said, I didn't want to say yes because such and such. And they would have said, okay, I understand that. Sources, you want to give away sources or something like that. Like he couldn't have known the question was coming. They all know the questions that are coming. They go through sessions where they train up on all the questions the congressmen are going to answer, are going to ask, and then, you know, they come up with their answers. I don't know.
Some people think they can say what they want, but they think they're untouchable.
They do that too, yeah. Got their lawyers all over the place. Don't get me started. I blame Vic. Got me started. Okay, anyway, so here's, you know, here's Abraham's infamous half-truth, which he's now said twice. He's gonna pass that down to, not exactly that, but he's gonna pass the duplicity on down to his son as well. We'll get to that. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know that you have done this in the integrity of your heart, and it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet. Might be the only place where Abraham is called a prophet. So that he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not return her, know that you shall surely die. Here's that corporate punishment, you and all who are yours. That's how, in for a penny, in for a pound. We're all in this together. So again, take care of, you know, beware of what you wish for if you want to go all in with God, because probably your family's coming with you. For better or for worse.
You know, and maybe you're getting there and I'm jumping ahead, dude. I see God's hand, you know, he says, yes, it's I that didn't let you touch her. Again, there didn't want to be any question as to whose child, who is the father of Sarah's child.
That's a good point. We're right on the eve of, there's another threat to the promise,
Yes.
the covenant promise, right? Actually, it's a threat to a promise God made within the last year. So within the last year, God has said, this time next year, you're going to have a son. Sarah's going to have a son. She laughed at it. Unflattering picture of Sarah. And so we're within a year of that, and now this happens. And Abimelech, then the king of whoever these people are, becomes again a threat to the promise. But the promise is not from a long time ago in chapter 12 or 15. The promise was from just a little while ago. What is he doing? What on earth is Abraham doing? I don't understand. His nation was in real trouble. All who are yours probably means the whole nation. That would be my guess.
Well, Israel would have liked that eventually, if they went ahead and wiped out the whole nation.
For the sake of the future of Israel, because that territory is going to be such a problem.
But there wouldn't have been an Israel.
And it still is. So we can say Israel got rid of the Philistine problem, and even though they're not Philistines, descendants of Philistines, the people that are there now, there's something about that land. It's like cursed ground. The land underneath your feet, if you're walking on Gaza, it's like cursed ground.
You see, Israel does not want that land. The Gaza Strip. They do not want.
Yeah, I don't know why that is.
You said, it's your friend.
Yeah. There's other land like that over there that's I was just watching this documentary on Babylon and the excavation of Babylon. Or is it Nineveh? Nineveh. And it's built up all around it, the ruins of Nineveh, but the city itself is still desolate. It still just sits there desolate, unoccupied. It's really interesting.
Now, is Nineveh in the country of Iraq also?
To the north, I don't know, to the northwest. I don't remember how far.
Babylon's not, right?
I'm going to avoid his attempt to try to get me to derail myself and go look up Nineveh, and
You brought it up.
I did bring it up. I was testing you. Okay, so he gets the order, just like Pharaoh got the order. Very similar story. What's it doing here? You know, secular scholars are going to say it's a doublet. It just accidentally made its way repeated in the narrative. Come on. talk about these people, these authors like they're stupid. These stories all function for a reason in these narratives. They propel forward. Why would you include for a second time a story that is so unflattering to the great patriarch on the eve of the birth of Isaac? Why would you put it in there? Why would you include it? I've never understood that. They just treat these authors, they talk about these authors like they're morons. And they're not, they're master storytellers. The guy who wrote the book of Acts is a master storyteller. His account of Paul's voyage to Rome and the shipwreck is one of the great seagoing travel narratives in the history of travel narratives. Period. Was the guy that wrote the voyage and shipwreck of St. Paul a couple of 100 years ago? I forget the guy. I'm going to buy that book one of these days. He did a whole book on that narrative. But these guys are master storytellers. That's one of the reasons the stories survive. That's one of the reasons that the peoples that inherit these writings, even though they're unflattering to their own heritage, treat them as inspired. And the same thing is true of the disciples, because the Gospels present a very negative, in many ways, a very negative, unflattering. It's a very unflattering portrayal of the disciples, but they're there and they stay there, including Paul in Acts chapter 8. Very unflattering. Still sits right there.
You know, Paul talked about, I think, I don't remember his first or second Corinthians, somewhere that these stories referring to the Old Testament were written for us. There's something for us to gain in studying them. And perhaps one of the things for us to gain is an understanding that these guys were not superhuman, they call flat defense just like we do.
Yes, that's right. You're not a hero. And they're not heroes. Every one of them would reject that. There's one hero in the Bible.
Yeah.
And the authors make sure that's one of the points. Yeah.
Nineveh is in Iraq.
It is.
Part of Iraq, then.
They've got, it's interesting, they've got ruins on all these places. Since there's only 2 minutes left, we can do this. So we look for Gerar. See if they got ruins of Gerar or Gerar. Whoops. You know what? I'm gonna close this because, you know, even though I have strict on my search, you're at the mercy of whatever they decide to bring up for you on the search. Don't do that from the front of the room. Randomly search for something.
Yeah, I've been bit before.
How the book of Hebrews, how they tie the book of Hebrews back into the Old Testament. Is a free story.
Narrative, it's one of my quibbles with the modern evangelical church. Loves theology and doctrine and so forth. In my view, often at the expense of narrative. And we don't appreciate narrative as narrative. We tend to want to pull out of the narrative. David becomes a role model, positive and negative, and you highlight, don't be like David this way. David did this and this. Be like David this way, the man after God's own heart. All of that's true, but that's not why that's not why those stories are told. The stories are told because of their place in the history of redemption and in the story of Israel. So appreciate it as the story of Israel and let it speak to you, because you're gonna want to lay your own filters over the top of it and get out of it what you want. And to the extent possible, you put that aside and you go, okay, what is he communicating? What were they trying to communicate when they wrote this thing? And that's what you go for first. And if you go, well, I don't see why that matters. My response is, then stop right there. Don't make anything up. Don't work too hard. Right now, you don't understand why that matters, but give it 10 years and a couple of 100 hours of reading, a couple thousand hours of reading, 10,000 hours, and then you might have figured it out. And that's happened over and over and over again as I read, you know, even with Genesis. This is the second time we've been through Genesis in this book, or in this Sunday school class. But you just, it's a failing on our part that we don't understand why something matters. That's why a story is told, why something matters. And we want to then fill in the blank and say, well, I'll think this is what it must be, then I'm just gonna think that this is why it matters. David is, why is the story of Bathsheba there? Well, it's to teach us not to this and this and we don't need that story to teach us not to steal the commander of the soldier's wife. If you don't already know not to steal the soldier's wife, you have a bigger problem. You don't need that story for that. There's another reason that Bathsheba, who will become the mother of Solomon, the great king, there's a reason that story is there, other than to teach us something about life, the Christian life. That's what I think. Oh, I gotta stop. 10:07. Thank you. Yeah, actually, what he has to go. All right, we'll go ahead and stop there. I'll turn it off, and then if you want to quibble with me, then I can live with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop.